Prologue. 6-year-old Bessie Turrell huddled under her blanket as the darkness closed in around her, peering out from behind bunched knees. She saw little of her surroundings. That didn't matter, though. Bessie knew the layout of the room well enough from memory. All the children did. A tall, narrow chamber lay beyond her bed, under a fine layer of dust. Heavy curtains covered a large, single window, the cavity now filled with brick and mortar laid by a crude hand. Beside it, a small writing desk and chair, and set into the far wall, the wall that she was facing now, the panelled face of a door. The closet door. Bessie could not see it well in the gloom, but she knew it was there, staring at her across the space. It was closed, thank God. She had discovered that when they had first thrown her inside the room. Lying crumpled where she had fallen, one burning cheek pressed to the cold floorboards, she had screamed and pleaded until it seared her throat. Finally, as the silence between her cries grew louder than the cries themselves, she recognized the menace in that silence and the danger she was putting herself in. Stifling her panic, she had crawled to where she remembered the closet to be and reached out with dread, expecting to feel the nothingness of an empty doorway. Instead, her palm pressed against the cold, lacquered surface, and the relief that rushed through her was warm and welcome. From there she had retreated to the single bed in the far corner, and crawling beneath its prickly blanket which smelled of old carpets and dead moths, she had waited for footsteps, for the rattle of a key in a lock, waited for the morning to come. The silence around her was thick, and seemed to drape over everything like a collapsed tent. Every gasp or squeak she made sounded amplified in such unnatural quiet. No echo, no ambient noise. It was a vacuum that to Bessie didn't just fill the room, but the whole terrible house beyond it. Droplets of sweat ran down the inside of her arms. Her hair, once honey-coloured blonde, now felt like dead grass, clumped and tangled with itching roots. Long had it been since a loving brush had smoothed and parted that hair, almost too long for her to remember. Like most orphans, Bessie had barely known her parents. All she had known was an echo, and she clung to that like a favourite toy. Just as sleep began to tug at Bessie's eyelids, she became aware of a noise that filled her with fresh fear. A faint whistle had begun in her ears. It was a long, constant whine, in the background at first, but slowly increasing in volume. She had heard the older kids talking about it before, and they had called it the line. The description had puzzled Bessie, and had started her thinking of a clothesline or a line of children standing at the cafeteria. The older kids had said it meant trouble, and warned Bessie and her friends that if they ever heard it, then they should move away from where they were and find other kids. It was growing louder and more piercing. Bessie pressed her fingers into her ears and twisted them around. The booming, sucking static in her skull gave way the moment she withdrew, but the line remained, closing in. She was so distracted by the noise that she failed to notice that it was growing brighter in the chamber, the darkness pushed back by a weak luminescence emanating from beneath the door. Slowly, a rectangular beam of yellow light slid under the gap between the hallway door and the floor. Bessie saw it and bit down on her tongue. The pain jerked through the soft tissue like a fisherman's hook. She knew of that light, had heard of it. It was no hall light, no friendly torch beam. She watched as it moved across the doorway, filling the whole gap beneath, and then it began to reach in, the flat, horizontal beam stretching across the floor, sliding along the skirting and climbing chair legs. Bessie watched it crawl over her discarded slippers as it approached the foot of her bed. She prepared to scream, but when it touched the bed, it paused. There was a kettle steam hiss, which grew into a mess of reverberating whispers. If Bessie had ever played a record backward, then the effect would have been the same to her young ears. A guttural blending of hissing syllables ending in sharp, clipped pauses like the white peaks of waves. She didn't understand any of it, but something inside her recognized it was communication, maybe language. "Hello?" she squeaked, leaning forward. The whispering stopped. The light extinguished. Darkness washed back through the room like a black tide, and the lying grew louder still. Bessie realized she had just made a terrible mistake. "Idiot," she scolded herself. "They told you to stay quiet." She waited, her heartbeat marking the ticking of time, but there was nothing. The only sounds were the groaning of the house, the creaking of the bed springs beneath her, and the line in her ears. Reaching beneath the covers, her left hand slid along her right forearm until it came to the rubber band dangling about her wrist. She bit her lip and gave it a snap. A spark of pain stung her skin. "Lucky band, the mark of the damned," she whispered, and wished she had saved an extra 2 pieces of gum to foot the bill for one of Teddy's bird bone necklaces. She had always found them ghastly, but mouthful of dirt, she would have paid anything to have one now. The groan of rusted hinges crawled out of the darkness. Bessie froze, her heart fluttering in her throat. The noise had come from the black directly in front of her, and not from the hallway door to her left. She knew that the closet door had just opened. The realization that she was no longer alone was instant and primal. The prickling began on the back of her neck. The flesh on her forearms raised into pimples, and her bladder loosened. As warmth spread beneath her, a heavy, sinking feeling made her stomach heave and light patterns blink in her vision. She pulled the blanket up to her face and slid down in the bed, trying to be as small and flat as possible. A mouse under a handkerchief. That's what she was. Don't move, she told herself. Was that a squeak of the floorboards, perhaps? No, maybe not. Warm tears welled in Bessie's eyes. Her nose was cold, but her face was hot. Her lower lip began to tremble, and unable to stop herself, she began to moan. She pressed herself as hard as she could into the mattress, ignoring the uncomfortable damp between her legs. If only she could somehow press herself through the fabric inside the mattress, hide among the foam and the spring and the cockroaches where nothing could find her. A floorboard squeaked. She heard it for sure this time. She began to sob. Another squeak, this one closer. Something was crossing the room toward her. Bessie pulled her head under the covers and tried to remember the rhyme. A dark rhyme for dark places. "Where," she began, and it was more than just lyric, it was lament. The word caught in her throat. "Where, oh where," she tried again. Another floorboard squeaked. The words in her mind slipped, and she almost lost them. "Don't forget," her mind screamed. "Sing it now." "Where, oh where is forest green," she blurted. Silence. There was no further movement. Bessie waited again for a space measured only by heartbeats. The primal part of her sensed no movement above the covers, but she definitely felt that she was being watched. The rhyme. Her mind screamed, "Complete the rhyme, it will protect you." She began again, whispering the words and willing the intruder away. "Where, oh where," but it devolved into sobs. She needed to say the rest, finish the whole thing, but that required concentration, memory, and they were impossible to achieve while she lay there under the devil's gaze. Terror gnawed at her like a dog working a bone. "Where, oh where are you?" she moaned. It couldn't see her while she remained hidden. That was the rules. She knew that much. And if it couldn't see her, it couldn't get her. But she couldn't escape either. How long could this thing wait, she wondered. The lucky band bit her wrist again as she gave it another snap. "Lucky band," she tried, but nothing followed. Her mind was as thick as the black field soil that clung under her fingernails. Her thoughts were the earthworms squeezing through that soil, slow and straining. It was no good, the words wouldn't come. She was now defenseless. It was getting stuffy under the blanket. The air was getting heavier and her lungs swelled to catch whatever goodness was still left. Bessie took deeper and deeper breaths. It was like drinking hot water, nourishing and punishing at the same time, but she didn't dare leave the safety of her cover. She listened to the room outside, quiet and still. Nothing moved and nothing breathed. Bessie began to feel foolish. Maybe she was suffering for nothing. It was possible that the creaking she had heard was just the house settling. Maybe it was someone walking around upstairs, or rats crawling about. They had plenty of those, she supposed. Sweat stung her eyes, and she blinked it away. Discomfort was quickly overcoming fear inside the tropical heat of her cocoon. The fabric of her pajamas, slick with pee and sweat, clung to her legs, and it felt disgusting. Her mind continued to rationalize, explaining away the sounds as if they were as natural as rain on the roof. Of course it was nothing, she reasoned. Sure, the hum in her ears was still there, but nothing had happened. Fresh air was what she needed now. Her fingers slid out, curling over the lip of the blanket. She paused, expecting them to feel something grab or bite at them. The only bite came from the air, which was cold but refreshing. She ground at her lip, reluctant to move. Her lungs felt like they had shrunk to the size of shriveled balloons. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she slid the cover back. Cool air chilled her scalp, and she shivered in delight. Bessie relaxed a little. She must have imagined it. Her eyes peered over the covers. 2 wet hands clamped viciously onto the sides of Bessie's head and yanked upwards. Bessie screamed a high-pitched little girl scream, which sliced up through the darkness of the room, through the heavy wood of the door, and into the corridor outside. Slowly it was drawn into a ragged howl of anguish no child should ever have reason to make. It was sandpaper against skin, a needle in the eye, nails down a chalkboard, and surely exceeding the lung capacity of a little girl. It bled the very humanity from the cut stone and the carved wood in its excess until it suddenly cut off. The echo faded into the darkness. Once again, a deep yellow light appeared under Bessie's door, paused, then swept away down the corridor, leaving all in darkness. Bessie Turrell was no more.